6:32 in the morning. That's when they came for my gate. I'd been awake maybe 8 minutes, still stuck in that half-dream haze, when the sound cut through the quiet. Metal grinding against metal, a violent screech that had no business existing on a calm Sunday dawn. By the time I reached the window, it was already over. My custom wrought iron gate, the one I designed myself after Sophia died, was twisted and collapsed on the gravel like something betrayed. 6 men stood there in matching white polos, with HOA enforcement stamped across their backs. A diesel truck idled behind them, thick and loud. And at the edge of my property line stood Martin Calder with a megaphone, posture loose, confident, like a man who had never once been told no and forced to accept it. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for 21 days. Before you decide what you think about what happened next, you need to know how we got here. And yeah, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I've learned that stories like this land differently depending on where you call home. 3 months before that morning, I stood on the same porch watching the Arizona sun roll across the desert outside Phoenix, painting the land in copper and rust. Saguaros threw long shadows across my half-acre lot, and a cactus wren sang somewhere beyond the mesquite fence. It had been 16 months since Sophia lost her fight with cancer. This house, a single-story ranch on the edge of the city, was the first thing that made me think life might still have a shape after her. I'd spent 14 years saving for a place like this, far enough out to breathe, close enough that my daughter Emma could finish her senior year without changing schools. When the realtor mentioned the HOA, I barely registered it. Monthly dues, community maintenance, routine suburban nonsense. I paid on time and assumed that was where it ended. The gate was my proudest project. After Sophia passed, I spent nearly 4 months designing it, wrought iron with a sun motif in the center, rays spreading outward like light forcing its way through darkness. I hired a local blacksmith named Raoul to build it, and when it was finally installed, I stood in the driveway and cried for the first time since her funeral. That gate wasn't just metal. It was the first thing I'd created with my own vision since becoming a widower. The Architectural Review Committee approved the design without a single note. I kept that approval letter in my filing cabinet beside Sophia's death certificate and Emma's birth records, documents marking the moments that defined my life. "Dad, there's a strange letter in the mailbox." Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, holding an envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I took it and tore it open. Inside was a single page, Violation Notice Number 1, printed in harsh red ink. According to the notice, my gate violated community architectural standards and had to be removed within 30 days. A $65 fine was attached, due immediately. I read it 3 times. The approval letter sat less than 10 feet away in my home office. "What does it say?" Emma asked. "Nothing important," I said. "Just a mistake." That afternoon, I pulled out the CC&Rs, the covenants governing the community. I'm a systems analyst by trade, which means I don't argue with anything until I understand how it's built. Section 4 covered architectural modifications. Nothing banned wrought iron, nothing prohibited custom designs. The language explicitly allowed fencing and entry features consistent with desert aesthetics. My gate, earth tone finish, southwestern design, fit perfectly. I photographed the pages and saved them in a folder labeled HOA Evidence. People like me survive by documenting everything. The next morning, I called the HOA office. A woman answered with a voice that sounded sharpened by years of saying no. I explained the approval letter, the contradiction, the obvious error. She put me on hold for 6 minutes. When she came back, she offered exactly 1 sentence. "Mr. Calder will contact you directly." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling something unfamiliar start to stir. Not anger, not yet, more like the sense of stepping onto a game board whose rules weren't posted anywhere. That evening, I did my usual walkthrough, checking locks, testing the alarm panel, making sure the windows were secured. It was a routine I'd developed after Sophia died. The house felt too big without her, and rituals helped fill the silence. When I passed the bedroom, my eyes landed on the gun safe in the corner. Inside was my father's Remington 870, a pump shotgun he'd left me 9 years earlier. I'd fired it twice at a range, both times feeling like I was holding something heavier than steel. "Hope you never need it, but know how it works," he'd said. I checked the battery indicator, full, and moved on without opening it. The next afternoon changed the temperature of everything. Emma and I were eating lunch when she froze mid-sentence, eyes locked on the kitchen window. I followed her gaze. A white SUV with HOA security stenciled on the door crawled down our street at walking speed. It stopped directly in front of our house. 30 seconds passed. The driver stayed hidden behind tinted glass. Then it rolled away. Neither of us spoke. But when I looked at my daughter, I saw something I hadn't seen since the weeks after her mother's funeral. The instinctive alertness of someone realizing safety isn't guaranteed. That night, I walked the perimeter with a flashlight, evaluating my camera setup with new urgency. 3 years old, 4 cameras total, blind spots along the east side yard and near the irrigation controls out back. When I installed the system, it was meant for porch thieves and coyotes. Now those gaps felt like open wounds. I made a mental note: upgrade immediately, add infrared, eliminate dead zones. I told myself it was nothing, a clerical mess, a box someone checked to justify their paycheck. The gate would stay, the fine would disappear. By next month, this would be a story I laughed at neighborhood cookouts. Standing on the porch that night, watching stars appear over the desert, I almost believed it. I almost convinced myself that logic and paperwork still mattered. I had no idea Martin Calder had already decided my gate was coming down, and that he was willing to scorch everything around it to make that happen. 2 weeks passed in silence. I nearly convinced myself the violation notice was an automated ghost. Then the second envelope arrived, thicker, stamped urgent, like a threat disguised as administration. Violation notice 2. Same complaint. The fine doubled to $130. A second page warned that continued non-compliance would result in a lien against my property. 3 hours of legal research later, I learned what that meant. In Arizona, HOA liens can lead to foreclosure. They could take my house over a gate they had approved. 3 days later, Martin Calder showed up at my door.
Martin Calder stood on my porch with a clipboard tucked under his arm like it was an extension of his spine. Late 50s, gray hair slicked back too carefully, smile practiced and hollow. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't step back to give space. He just stood there, occupying the threshold like he already owned it. "Mr. Walker," he said, voice smooth, "I wanted to speak to you face to face, neighbor to neighbor." I kept the screen door between us. "There's nothing to talk about. I have written approval for the gate." His smile didn't move. "Standards evolve. The board reviewed your installation and determined it no longer aligns with community expectations." He gestured vaguely toward the driveway, like the gate had personally offended him. "It draws attention, makes people uncomfortable." I told him I'd followed every procedure, submitted designs, received written approval. Something flickered behind his eyes, irritation mixed with surprise that I hadn't folded already. "Approvals can be reconsidered," he said. "Documentation can be revoked." His smile tightened, teeth finally showing. "You should think carefully about whether this is the hill you want to die on. 30 days, then enforcement proceeds." He turned and walked back to his white SUV without waiting for a response, dust curling behind his tires as he left. Standing there, I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was personal. After Calder's visit, the patrols changed. Before, the HOA SUV rolled past once or twice a day. Annoying, ignorable. Now it crept by 4, sometimes 5 times between sunrise and sunset. The driver occasionally lifted a phone, taking photos of my property. The damage went deeper than surveillance. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly found the ground fascinating when I stepped outside. Conversations stopped when I approached the mailbox cluster. I became visible but unacknowledged, a ghost walking my own street. Emma brought the poison home from school. A classmate, daughter of a board member, had loudly asked why our house was under investigation. By Friday, Emma was eating lunch alone in the library. She didn't tell me directly. I noticed because she stopped mentioning friends. When I picked her up, her eyes had that hollow look I remembered from the months after Sophia died. I called a real estate attorney named Lucas Herrera, recommended by a colleague. The first half hour was free. I laid it all out: approval letter, violation notices, escalating fines, lien threat. He listened without interrupting. "Document everything," he said. "Letters, patrol passes, interactions, dates, times, photos. Courts love paper trails. And if they try to remove the gate themselves, that's trespass. Arizona law is clear." He paused. "But people like this don't rely on legality. They rely on pressure. The question is whether you can outlast them." That afternoon, I sent a formal response via certified mail, citing the approval, quoting CC&R sections, and demanding documentation of any policy changes. The tracking number went into my growing evidence folder. The night visit started 2 days later. I woke just after 2 to a sound I couldn't place, soft, deliberate, like careful footsteps on gravel. I lay still, listening. The sound stopped, started again, then stopped completely. I moved to the window without turning on lights. At the end of the block sat the HOA SUV, headlights off, engine dead, just parked in the dark, watching. I stood there for 20 minutes. It never moved. Neither did I. Something shifted between us, an unspoken understanding that this had moved beyond paperwork. They wanted me uneasy in my own home, and it was working. The next morning, Emma found me in the kitchen before sunrise, coffee cold, laptop open to the county sheriff's non-emergency page. She looked at the screen, then at my face. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm scared." I pulled her close, felt her shoulders shake. Over her head, my eyes drifted to the bedroom doorway, to the corner where the gun safe sat. Sophia hated guns. She tolerated my father's shotgun only because it was family. But Sophia wasn't here, and the people circling our house didn't care about letters or procedures. I held Emma until her breathing steadied. Then I made a decision I'd been avoiding. Tomorrow, I would open the safe. The harassment escalated fast. The following Monday, a letter accused me of excessive noise violations. No dates, no times, no complaining neighbor, just a $95 fine for disturbances that never happened. I worked from home. The loudest thing I did was type. The accusation wasn't meant to convince, it was meant to drain me. 4 days later, my irrigation system shut off. I noticed when the prickly pear near the walkway started yellowing under May heat. Management blamed scheduled maintenance. Every other lawn on the street stayed green, only mine dried out. The outage lasted 4 days. By the time water returned, 3 saguaros showed stress fractures that would take years to heal. Bureaucracy was killing my garden. Then the garbage truck stopped coming. I watched it service every house except mine. When I flagged the driver down, he shrugged. Obstruction notice. My cans sat exactly where they'd sat for 16 months. Same curb, same clearance. I filed a complaint. Nothing changed. Then Calder sent the email. 219 households. Subject line designed to inflame. Property value risk. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. The message warned that one resident's non-compliance could reduce values by 12% and urged community solidarity. Translation, insulate him until he breaks. Emma took the hit hardest. A group project partner requested reassignment. The senior events committee quietly removed her, citing scheduling conflicts. She came home one afternoon with mascara streaked down her cheeks and locked herself in the room. When she finally emerged, her voice was raw. "Why won't you just change the stupid gate? I hate here. Mom would have wanted us happy, not fighting everyone over metal." For 1 weak moment, I considered giving in, removing the gate, paying everything, making her years survivable. Then I remembered what Sophia taught Emma when she still had strength. Stand for something, or you fall for everything. If I back down now, this wouldn't end. They'll find something else, I told her. This isn't about the gate anymore. Emma stared at me, nodded once, and went back to her room. I didn't know if I'd convinced her or lost her. The final notice arrived 3 days later. Scheduled removal of non-compliant structure. 7 days out. No court order, no filing, just a declaration that enforcement would enter my property with or without consent. I called Lucas immediately. "They can't do this," he said, and for the first time I heard concern. "That's criminal trespass. If they bring tools, it escalates." He told me to call the sheriff now before anything happened, create a record. That night, I ordered 2 wireless cameras with infrared and cloud backup. They'd arrive in 3 days. Then I called the county non-emergency line and reported the threat. I got a case number and advice I already understood. If they enter, call 911. When I hung up, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. I stood in front of the gun safe for a long moment, Sophia's photo watching from the nightstand. I punched in the code. The Remington sat where I had left it, oiled, maintained, 5 shells loaded. I lifted it and carried it to the living room. He would stay within reach. Outside, darkness swallowed the desert. The patrol SUV passed at midnight. Again at 2. At 4, it stopped at the end of the block. Engine off, lights dead, just parked in the dark, watching. I didn't sleep. 6 days until they came. 6 days to prepare.
The cameras arrived on Thursday afternoon, 3 days before Calder's deadline. I spent 4 hours in the brutal Arizona heat installing them with precision that bordered on obsession. 2 covered the front gate from opposing angles. 1 watched the backyard near the irrigation controls. The 4th was mounted inside the garage, hardwired to a backup drive. Every inch of my property line was now visible in high-definition infrared, uploading simultaneously to cloud storage and local memory. If 1 camera failed, 3 others would still be watching. When I finished, I tested each feed on my laptop until there were no blind spots left. Whatever happened next would be recorded. That night, I reread Arizona statutes until the words blurred together. The law was clear. Entering private property without permission or court authority was criminal trespass. Bringing tools with intent to damage property elevated it to a felony. Castle doctrine meant I had no duty to retreat from my own land. I could display a firearm to deter unlawful entry. I could not fire unless there was an imminent threat to life. The line was thin, but it was visible, and I memorized exactly where it sat. I needed to stay on the correct side of it, no matter what. The next morning, Sergeant Luis Ortega from the county sheriff's office returned my call. I walked him through everything: the approval letter, the fines, the surveillance, the final notice threatening forced entry. He listened carefully, asking pointed questions. "You did the right thing reporting this early," he said. "If they come onto your property without a court order, that's trespass. Their HOA rules don't override state law." I asked what to do if they showed up. "Call 911 immediately. Don't engage physically unless you have no choice. And if you choose to be armed on your property, that's your right. Keep the weapon pointed down unless your life is directly threatened." His tone carried the weight of someone who'd seen situations like this go wrong. I thanked him and saved his name. That afternoon, I started fortifying, not aggressively, just deliberately. Heavy planters filled with rock went inside the gate, positioned to slow any vehicle that tried to force entry. It wouldn't stop a truck, but it would buy time. The shotgun moved near the front door, loaded, safety on, visible through the window. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. I was drawing a boundary. The hardest conversation came that evening. Anna was doing homework at the kitchen table when I sat across from her. "I need you to stay with the Alvarez family for a few days," I said. They lived just outside HOA jurisdiction, and Sophia had trusted them completely. Emma looked up, fear sharp in her eyes. "I don't want to leave you alone," her voice cracked. "You being safe matters more than anything," I told her. "I need to handle this without worrying about you." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Promise you won't do anything stupid." I squeezed her hand. "I promise I'll only do what the law allows." I drove her over the next morning, watching her disappear through their front door with fear still clinging to her shoulders. Mrs. Alvarez hugged me and promised she'd be safe. I believed her. Sophia had always chosen good people. That afternoon, I got a message from Nicole Reyes, the neighbor 3 houses down. She was the only person in the community who hadn't gone silent. "They rented a large truck," she wrote. "Saw Calder on his phone saying tomorrow, early." I read it twice. Tomorrow, less than 20 hours away. The timeline collapsed around me. That night, I killed every light in the house and took my position by the front window. The darkness felt appropriate, like the world was bracing itself. The patrol SUV passed at midnight, again at 2, again at 4. On the final pass, it stopped at the end of my driveway for nearly 10 minutes, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn haze. I sat motionless with a shotgun across my knees, laptop open beside me, showing all 4 camera feeds. Let them see I was awake. Let them understand this house wasn't unguarded. The SUV pulled away as gray light crept over the mountains. I ran through my checklist one last time. Phone charged, 911 on speed dial, case number saved, attorney contact ready, cameras recording, shotgun safety engaged, coffee brewing, mind steady. 16 months earlier, I'd come here looking for quiet. I'd followed every rule, asked for permission for every change, and still they came. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I wouldn't kneel. The sun was just touching the horizon when I heard it. Diesel engines, multiple vehicles. I moved to the window and watched the convoy appear through the pale light. A flatbed truck with a crane attachment led the way, followed by 3 white pickups loaded with equipment. They stopped just outside my property line, engines idling. 7 men climbed out, all wearing the same white polos with HOA enforcement printed on the back. And then Calder stepped out of the lead truck, megaphone in hand, expression calm and rehearsed. I picked up my phone and dialed 911 before he raised it. The dispatcher answered immediately. I gave my name, address, and case number. "There are 7 individuals attempting unauthorized entry onto my property. I am requesting immediate assistance." She asked if anyone was armed. "I have a legally owned firearm inside my home. I am not threatening anyone." She told me units were on their way and advised me to stay inside. I set the phone down on speaker. Calder's amplified voice shattered the morning. "Attention, Mr. Walker. Pursuant to authority granted by the association, we are here to remove a non-compliant structure. You have 60 seconds to open the gate and allow access." I watched him through the glass, felt something settle in my chest. Not fear, purpose. The enforcement team moved toward the gate with bolt cutters and pry bars. I lifted the shotgun, checked the safety, and stepped onto the porch. I stayed well inside my property line, feet planted on the boards Sophia and I had repaired together. I held the shotgun pointed at the ground, hands visible. "This is private property. You have no court order. I've contacted the sheriff. Leave immediately." Calder lowered the megaphone and stepped closer, stopping just outside the line. "Are you threatening us with a firearm?" he asked, phone raised, likely recording. "I'm exercising my legal rights on my own property. You are attempting unlawful entry. This is your only warning." The team hesitated. One younger man lowered his cutter slightly. Calder's jaw tightened. "Proceed," he ordered. "He's bluffing." The team leader clamped the cutters around my lock. Metal screamed. The lock snapped. The gate swung inward with a groan that felt like something tearing loose inside me. The flatbed rolled forward, tires crunching gravel. They were on my property now. "You are committing criminal trespass," I said loudly. "This is being recorded." The truck stopped 30 feet from my porch. Calder strode through the gate, triumph on his face. "Put the gun down," he said. "You've lost." I didn't move. "The sheriff is already coming. Everything here is recorded." For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He opened his mouth to respond, and sirens cut through the air. Deputies were coming fast. Calder's color drained. I allowed myself the smallest smile. "Stay where you are," I said. "You're about to meet real authority." 2 sheriff's cruisers came around the corner hard, tires biting into gravel as they skidded to a stop at the edge of my driveway. Red and blue light bars washed the morning in violent color. Deputies stepped out fast, hands near their holsters, eyes sweeping the scene in practiced arcs. The flatbed truck sat on my gravel. 7 men with tools froze mid-motion. Calder stood just inside my property line, megaphone hanging uselessly at his side. I was on the porch, shotgun angled toward the ground, body still. "Everyone stop," one deputy shouted. "Drop the tools and keep your hands visible." I slowly lowered the shotgun to the porch floor, stepping back with deliberate movements. The cameras kept recording. For 90 seconds, everything moved with sharp, controlled urgency. Deputies spread out, voices firm, commands precise. Pry bars clattered to gravel, bolt cutters hit the ground. The enforcement crew raised their hands, confidence draining out of them in real time. Only Calder hesitated, standing rigid in my driveway like his brain hadn't caught up yet. Another cruiser pulled in, and Sergeant Luis Ortega stepped out, calm and unhurried, eyes already sorting truth from noise. He took in the broken gate, the truck on my land, the men with tools, then looked at Calder. "Identify yourself," Ortega said. "Martin Calder," he replied, squaring his shoulders. "President of the Community Association. We're conducting lawful enforcement. Do you have a court order authorizing entry onto this property?" Ortega asked. Calder's jaw tightened. "Our governing documents—" "I asked about a court order," Ortega interrupted. Silence stretched. "No," Calder said finally. Ortega nodded once, then turned slightly toward me. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" I confirmed my name and that the firearm was legally owned and never pointed at anyone. A deputy secured it without drama. Ortega turned back to Calder. "You entered private property without authorization and with tools intended to damage property. That's criminal trespass." I saw Calder's face cycle from disbelief to indignation to something closer to fear. "I have video," I said. "Multiple angles, everything since before they arrived." Ortega acknowledged it with a glance toward the garage camera. "We'll review it." He looked back at Calder. "I'm going to ask questions. I suggest you answer carefully." Calder didn't. Instead of staying quiet, instead of asking for an attorney, he unraveled. He launched into a speech about standards, authority, defiance, how I'd forced his hand. He admitted authorizing the entry, insisted it was necessary. Every word dug him deeper. Ortega listened without expression. When Calder finished, Ortega asked, "Did you record that?" I nodded toward the cameras, green light steady. Calder's face went pale. I pulled up the footage on my laptop. We watched the convoy arrive, the ultimatum, the cutters snapping the lock. Then Ortega paused on a clip from the side yard, Calder on his phone before the gate breach. "Go ahead," his voice said clearly. "He won't do anything. I'll take responsibility." Ortega looked at him. "You are under arrest." The cuffs clicked shut. Calder protested, words tumbling over each other, but they carried no weight. His men watched as he was led to a cruiser, the exact moment when they understood how badly they'd misjudged the situation. Statements followed. Neighbors gathered at the street edge, drawn by sirens and spectacle. No one avoided my eyes now. They watched Calder sit in the back of a patrol car, his power evaporated. Ortega shook my hand before leaving. "You handled this correctly," he said. "Documentation, early reporting, no escalation." I nodded, exhaustion settling into my bones. When the cruisers pulled away, the driveway felt unnaturally quiet. I stood alone on the porch, looking at the damage. One hinge torn free, the sun motif bent but intact, still catching light. The gate Sophia never saw finished stood wounded but unbroken. I understood then that it had never been just a gate, it was a line. I called Emma. She answered immediately. "It's over," I said. "You can come home." I heard the fear in her voice dissolve as she exhaled. 2 days later, Detective Ana Ruiz arrived with a recorder and a stack of questions. I walked her through everything, handed over my documentation. She studied it carefully. "This is thorough, much more than most." Charges were filed within the week. Calder faced 2 felony counts in conspiracy. The team leader took a lesser charge, the rest cooperated. The investigation widened. Detective Ruiz told me other families had endured similar campaigns. Gardens, solar panels, landscaping, same pattern, same pressure, same outcome. Calder hadn't enforced standards. He'd crushed dissent. The truth reframed everything. My attorney filed the civil suit days later. Personal liability, association negligence. Repair costs stayed in the thousands, emotional damages stayed in the tens of thousands, punitive damages stayed proportionate. It wasn't about numbers, it was about record. The community reacted fast. A petition circulated demanding a new board. Meetings were called. I didn't attend. My fight wasn't with my neighbors. Emma came home that weekend, cautious at first, then lighter. Friends reappeared. Apologies followed. One afternoon, I found her photographing the saguaros. Just in case, she said. I didn't tell her I'd already documented everything. Control mattered. A settlement offer came quickly. Quiet money, silence. I declined. I wanted accountability on record. Trial preparations began. Months later, in a county courtroom, Calder accepted a plea. Probation, community service, a 10-year-long ban from any association leadership. Restitution paid directly to me. He didn't look defiant. He looked tired. When he met my eyes, he looked away first. The civil case resolved soon after. The association paid. Legal fees covered, a written apology signed by the remaining board acknowledging the illegality. New leadership took over. Rules changed. Oversight tightened. The new gate went up in early summer. Raul rebuilt it at cost. Same design, same sun. On the back, hidden from the street, he etched a single line. I ran my fingers over it and felt the metal warm. That evening, Emma and I sat on the porch as the desert cooled. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" asked Emma. I thought carefully. "I think she'd be proud we didn't run." Emma leaned against my shoulder. The stars came out one by one. The house felt like home again, not because it was quiet, but because it was ours.
The weeks after Calder's arrest moved in a strange, uneven rhythm, like the world was recalibrating around the absence of his shadow. On the surface, things quieted quickly. The patrol SUV disappeared. The warning letters stopped. No more envelopes stamped urgent. No more fines manufactured out of thin air. But underneath that calm, everything was still vibrating with aftermath. I felt it every time I stepped outside and noticed neighbors watching me openly now, curiosity replacing avoidance. I felt it when I walked past the mailbox cluster, and conversations didn't stop anymore, but instead shifted awkwardly, people unsure whether to apologize or pretend nothing had happened. The neighborhood hadn't transformed overnight. It was learning how to exist without fear. Detective Ana Ruiz came back twice more, each visit shorter than the last. The first follow-up was procedural, clarifying timelines, confirming names, cross-checking video timestamps. The second was quieter. She told me the county attorney had expanded the scope of the case after reviewing my footage alongside HOA records subpoenaed from the association's office, email chains, internal memos, notes Calder never expected anyone outside the board to see. They painted a picture that made my situation feel less personal and more systemic. Calder had flagged problem residents for years. Anyone who questioned a fine, anyone who cited state law, anyone who refused to comply quickly and quietly. Once marked, the pressure campaign began. Surveillance, selective enforcement, social isolation. Eventually, people sold or folded. My gate wasn't an exception, it was just the trigger. Lucas Herrera explained what that meant for the civil case. "This isn't just about damages anymore," he said during one of our calls. "It's about pattern and intent. That changes everything." We adjusted filings accordingly. The numbers stayed proportional, repairs in the low thousands, emotional distress in the mid-five figures, punitive damages scaled to reflect misconduct, not spectacle. I didn't want headlines. I wanted precedent, something future homeowners could point to and say, this line exists for a reason. Emma tried to settle back into routine, but routine had shifted under her feet. For weeks, she startled at raised voices, flinched when trucks slowed near the house. Healing came in small increments, a friend texting first, a laugh that didn't sound forced. One evening, she asked if she could have friends over again. I said yes immediately, then realized how long it had been since that question felt normal. When they came, the house filled with noise that wasn't threatening. Music, conversation, the ordinary chaos of teenagers. I sat on the porch and let it wash over me, proof that normalcy could return. The association called an emergency meeting a week after Calder's arrest. Flyers appeared on doors, heavy with careful language about recent events and community trust.
I didn't go, not out of spite, but because my presence would have warped the room. This wasn't my reckoning to manage. It belonged to the neighbors who'd lived under Calder's rule and either complied or stayed silent to survive. Nicole Reyes later told me the meeting was tense, raw. People spoke openly for the first time, recounting fines, threats, quiet intimidation. By the end of the night, 2 board members resigned on the spot. A settlement offer arrived faster than I expected. The association's insurance carrier wanted resolution. The figure was clean, tempting, structured to make everything go away. Lucas laid it out without pressure. It's a strong offer for this stage, but it includes non-disclosure. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. Silence followed. Then Lucas exhaled. All right, he said, then we prepare. He didn't sound surprised. Preparation meant depositions. Calder's, taken from a holding room at the county facility, was a disaster. He contradicted himself repeatedly, minimized his recorded statements, claimed misunderstandings that didn't survive basic scrutiny. When his former enforcement crew testified, the pattern sharpened. Calder told them the board had legal authority. He told them lawyers had approved everything. He told them resistance was expected and harmless. One by one, they confirmed it under oath. Each confirmation tightened the case. Outside the legal machinery, life kept inching forward. The irrigation system was repaired properly this time. Waste management apologized and resumed service. Small things, but each one felt like reclaiming territory. I repaired the temporary damage to the driveway and removed the planters that had served as barriers. The house slowly stopped feeling like a checkpoint. One afternoon, a man knocked on my door I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, nervous, hands clasped. He introduced himself as Aaron Whitman. He and his wife had sold their house 2 years earlier after months of conflict with the HOA over backyard modifications. "We thought it was just us," he said. "When we heard what happened here, we wanted you to know you weren't wrong." He didn't ask for anything, he just wanted to say it out loud. When he left, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, absorbing the weight of how many people had carried this alone. The trial date was set, then postponed, then reset. That's how these things go. Calder's attorney pushed for plea negotiations as the evidence stack grew heavier. When the plea finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No grand speeches, just a judge reading terms with detached precision. Probation measured in years, not months. Community service counted in hundreds of hours. A long prohibition from any HOA leadership role statewide. Restitution paid directly to me, structured and enforceable. Calder didn't argue. He didn't look at me until the end. And when he did, there was no anger left, just exhaustion. The civil case resolved shortly after. The final agreement included full legal fees, repair costs, and a formal written acknowledgement from the association that Calder's actions had been unauthorized and unlawful. No sweeping apology, no public statement crafted for optics. Just a document, signed, filed, and permanent. That mattered more. The new board took office quietly. Nicole won a seat. 2 others followed who'd never spoken up before but had been waiting for the chance. Their first changes were procedural and boring, exactly what governance should be. Clear enforcement timelines, external review requirements, explicit prohibitions against unauthorized entry, boring rules that prevent exciting abuse. Raul rebuilt the gate in late June. Same design, same iron, same sun, centered and defiant. On the back, hidden from the street, he added a small inscription without asking first. When I saw it, I didn't tell him to remove it. Some things are meant to stay unseen until they're needed. The first neighborhood gathering after everything happened wasn't official. Just a few families, folding chairs, food brought without coordination. Emma moved easily among them, lighter now. At one point, she caught my eye and smiled, unforced. I realized then that this was the real victory. Not the charges or the documents, but the return of ease. Late that night, after everyone left, I walked to the gate and rested my hand against the iron. It was cool, solid, unmoving. The desert was quiet again, not with tension, but with rest. I stood there longer than I needed to, letting the moments settle. Some battles end with noise, others end with stillness. This one had given me both. Summer settled over the desert like a held breath finally released. Heat shimmering off the asphalt, cicadas filling the evenings with their relentless hum. With Calder gone and the board reshuffled, the neighborhood didn't snap back to normal all at once. It eased into it, cautious, like an animal stepping out after a storm. The patrol SUV never returned. The cameras stayed, though, silent witnesses I had no intention of removing. I learned quickly that peace doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means remembering clearly enough that it doesn't happen again. Lucas kept me busy, motions, responses, scheduling calls that sounded dry until you understood what was underneath them, depositions wrapped, exhibits finalized. The civil case had momentum now, not the frantic kind, but the slow, grinding certainty of something that wouldn't be ignored. Every few days, Lucas would call with another update, another small win buried inside legal language. Calder's emails, his handwritten notes, testimony from a former board treasurer who admitted she'd been told to trust Martin and not ask questions. Each piece fit into the same shape: authority assumed, power abused, silence enforced. Emma threw herself into preparing for graduation, applications finalized, gown ordered. The future became something she could touch again. She still locked her bedroom door at night, still checked a front window if a truck slowed on the street. But she laughed more easily now. One evening, she asked if I could help her write a short essay about resilience for a scholarship application. She didn't mention the gate or the HOA. She didn't have to. It was all there between the lines. I found my own routine again. Morning coffee on the porch, a slow walk along the fence line, checking nothing in particular. Habit more than necessity. The shotgun went back into the safe, though the safe stayed unlocked during the day for a while longer. I didn't like what it represented, but I respected what it had done. It reminded me that boundaries only matter if you're willing to hold them. The trial date loomed closer, and with it came pressure. Subtle at first, a voicemail from an unfamiliar number suggesting mediation for everyone's benefit. An email from the association's insurer asking if I had reconsidered settlement in light of the community's healing. Lucas forwarded it with a single line: "Your call." I didn't reply. Healing that requires silence isn't healing, it's containment. 2 weeks before trial, I ran into Calder by accident. He was leaving the county building as I was arriving for a meeting with Lucas. Probation clothes, no polish, no entourage. Just a man suddenly smaller than the space around him. He stopped when he saw me, hesitated like he wasn't sure whether to speak. I kept walking. He said my name anyway, soft. I turned, not out of curiosity, but finality. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood," he said. The words sounded rehearsed, worn thin by repetition. "You were protecting yourself," I replied, "at everyone else's expense." He nodded once, like he already knew. We walked away in opposite directions, the conversation complete without resolution. The community barbecue happened a week later. Not official, no banners, just people showing up because they wanted to. Emma helped grill. I talked with neighbors I'd barely known before. Stories surfaced carefully, like fragile things finally safe to be held. A fine over a shed, a warning about paint color, a threat disguised as procedure. No one sounded angry anymore, just tired enough to want different. The trial didn't happen. 3 days before jury selection, Calder's attorney requested a final plea conference. The evidence was airtight, and everyone knew it. The plea was entered quietly, terms read into the record. No cameras, no spectacle. Calder accepted responsibility for criminal trespass and property damage. Sentencing followed weeks later, efficient and unsentimental. Probation measured in years, community service assigned where supervision was unavoidable, a decade-long ban from any HOA leadership role in the state. Restitution ordered, structured, enforceable. When the judge finished, Calder looked older than his years, like someone who'd finally understood the cost of shortcuts. The civil case settled within days of sentencing. The association's insurer folded, the risk calculus no longer favorable. The final agreement was comprehensive, repairs covered, fees paid. A written acknowledgement entered into public record stating Calder had acted without legal authority and in violation of state law. No confidentiality clause, no gag order, just accountability, preserved where it mattered. When the paperwork cleared, something unexpected happened. The adrenaline drained. For weeks I'd been operating on focus alone, moving from task to task without room for anything else. When it ended, the quiet rushed in all at once. I found myself sitting on the porch one afternoon, staring at the gate, unable to remember the last time I'd simply sat without listening for engines. The desert breeze moved through the ironwork, casting shifting shadows across the driveway. I let it. Emma graduated on a bright morning that felt almost too ordinary for everything that preceded it. I watched her cross the stage, confident, smiling, and felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Afterward, she hugged me hard. "We're okay," she said, like it was a conclusion reached through evidence. I nodded, trusting her judgment. That night, we sat on the porch with cold drinks, the air finally cooling. She asked if we could take a short trip before she left for school, somewhere quiet, somewhere without committees. I agreed immediately. The world felt larger again, and that mattered. The cameras stayed, the gate stayed, the lessons stayed. I learned that rules only protect you if they're enforced by people willing to be bound by them. I learned that documentation isn't paranoia when power goes unchecked.
I learned that standing your ground doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, patience, and refusing to disappear. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, I noticed the inscription Raoul had added to the back of the gate. I'd read it before, but this time it landed differently. Simple words, direct, no flourish. I rested my hand against the iron and felt the warmth that it held all day. The desert settled into its night sounds, untroubled, indifferent, enduring. I stood there until the first stars appeared, then went inside, locking the door, out of habit, not fear.
6 months after everything collapsed, I stood in a county courtroom and watched Martin Calder accept a plea deal that would permanently redraw the rest of his life. There was no drama left in him by then, no speeches, no righteous posture, just a tired man in an ill-fitting suit, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed somewhere past the judge, as if he were already rehearsing how to explain this version of himself to strangers who used to admire him. His attorney spoke carefully, negotiating words the way men do when there's nothing left to negotiate. The evidence had erased every option except surrender. 4 synchronized camera angles, recorded admissions, testimony from the very people he'd ordered onto my property. Calder had 2 choices, plead guilty or gamble on a trial that would likely end far worse. He chose mercy. The judge delivered the sentence without embellishment. 2 years of probation, $2,300 fine. He'd cooperated fully, testified honestly, and the court acknowledged it. Afterward, he approached me on the hallway, holding his hat in both hands like it weighed something. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything," he said, but he made it sound official, legal. I should have asked questions. I studied him for a moment, saw a man who'd trusted authority without understanding it. "Ask next time," I said. "That's how this stops." He nodded, shook my hand, and walked away straighter than he'd approached. The civil case settled 2 weeks before trial. The association's insurance carrier had followed the criminal proceedings closely and understood exactly how bad a jury verdict could be. The final offer was decisive. $115,000, full legal fees, gate repairs covered, and a formal written apology signed by every remaining board member acknowledging Calder's actions were unauthorized, unlawful, and damaging to residents. No non-disclosure clause, no silence requirement. The apology would exist on record. I accepted without hesitation. The money mattered less than the acknowledgement. Accountability only works when it's visible. The new board took office in a special election that felt more like a reset than a victory lap. Nicole Reyes won a seat alongside 2 residents who'd quietly opposed Calder for years but never felt safe enough to speak. Their first action was procedural and unglamorous. Revised CC&Rs requiring supermajority approval and mandatory legal review for any enforcement action involving private property. Their second was symbolic. They canceled all pending violations issued under Calder's tenure and refunded associated fines. It wasn't justice for everyone, but it was repair. Emma graduated on a clear May morning, sunlight reflecting off the stage as she walked across it with confidence I hadn't seen in over a year. I sat in the audience, hands clenched, thinking about how close she'd come to finishing high school as someone else's collateral damage. When her name was called, she smiled, and something inside me finally loosened. She'd been accepted to Northern Arizona University, close enough to visit, far enough to breathe. The night before graduation, she surprised me by laughing about everything we'd endured. "I learned standing up for yourself doesn't mean you're looking for a fight," she said. "And I learned you should always have backup cameras." I laughed harder than I had in months. Sophia's humor sharpened by survival. The replacement gate went up in late June. Raoul insisted on recreating the original at cost, refusing full payment. Same wrought iron, same sun motif, same proportions. On the back, invisible from the street, he'd etched a small line in clean script. I ran my fingers over it once the crew packed up and felt the metal warming under the afternoon heat. It didn't need to be explained. It just needed to exist. The neighborhood barbecue happened 2 weeks later, not an HOA event, no speeches, no agendas, just folding chairs, grills, and people relearning how to exist together without fear. 8 families came, including the Whitmans who drove in from Phoenix just to be there. Kids ran through the yard, conversations drifted easily. At one point, Mrs. Whitman pulled me aside and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finishing what we couldn't." I didn't have words, so I squeezed back. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch watching stars emerge over the desert. The saguaros had recovered. The garden was thriving again. The gate stood solid at the end of the driveway, its sun motif holding the last light. 18 months earlier, I'd come here searching for quiet after grief.
I'd found conflict instead, one I never asked for and couldn't avoid. But sitting there now, I understood the difference between peace that's given and peace that's built. One can be taken, the other becomes part of you. I raised my coffee cup toward the bright star over the eastern mountains, the one I'd claimed for Sophia the night after her funeral. "We kept it," I said softly. The desert answered with silence and the distant call of a cactus wren settling in for the night. Somewhere across the county, Martin Calder was beginning his community service hours, learning what it meant to serve instead of rule. Somewhere else, Nicole was drafting agendas for a board that would protect residents instead of persecuting them. Somewhere, families who'd fled years earlier were hearing that things had finally changed. And here, on half an acre of Arizona desert, a widower and his daughter slept peacefully in a house no one had managed to take from them. Not through harassment, not through intimidation, not through uniforms and trucks and men who believed authority was something you could print on a polo shirt. The gate Raoul built would outlast all of it: iron, craft, memory, and a message hidden on the back for anyone who ever needed it.
A year after the morning the gate came down, I woke before sunrise out of habit and stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee that steamed against the cool desert air. The house was quiet in the way it's supposed to be quiet, not the tense silence of listening for engines, but the settled stillness of a place at rest. The new gate stood at the end of the driveway, iron dark against the pale gravel, its sun motif catching the first light as it crept over the mountains. For a long moment I just stood there, letting the past loosen its grip. Time doesn't erase what happened, but it does sand down the edges until memory stops cutting. Emma was already packing for college inside, boxes stacked neatly, labels written in careful handwriting. She moved with purpose now, not the brittle urgency of someone trying to escape, but the steady confidence of someone stepping forward. We developed a rhythm again: morning coffee, evening walks, conversations that drifted without circling back to fear. Sometimes she asked questions about the case, about how things worked legally, about why certain lines mattered. I answered honestly, not shielding her from the complexity. What we went through wasn't something to hide, it was something to understand. The HOA rarely crossed my mind anymore, which felt like the greatest victory of all. Meetings still happened, rules still existed, but they were dull, procedural, properly boring. Nicole occasionally updated me, not with drama, but with small confirmations that things were functioning the way they should have all along. Budgets approved, maintenance scheduled, disputes resolved with conversation instead of threats. Power, when constrained, loses its appetite for spectacle. One afternoon, a man knocked on my door carrying a clipboard. For half a second, muscle memory tightened in my chest. Then I recognized the logo, County Assessor's Office. Routine inspection. He was polite, professional, efficient. When he finished, he paused at the gate, admiring the craftsmanship. "That's solid work," he said. "They don't make many like that anymore." I thanked him, and he left without incident. The moment passed, and the world didn't end. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. The restitution money sat untouched for months, not because I didn't need it, but because I didn't want it to define the outcome. Eventually, I used part of it to fund a scholarship at Emma's school, something modest for students navigating loss or upheaval. No plaque, no announcement, just a quiet redirection of something taken and returned into something useful. Sophia would have liked that. On the anniversary of her passing, Emma and I drove out past the city, away from subdivisions and streetlights, to where the desert opens wide and honest. We sat on the tailgate of the truck and watched the sun dip low, painting the horizon in familiar copper and amber. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think it would have been easier if we'd just left?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "Easier," I said finally, "isn't always the same as better." She nodded, considering it, then smiled faintly. That was enough. Back home, life continued to assert itself in ordinary ways. A sprinkler head needed replacing. A neighbor asked to borrow a ladder. The mail arrived on time. Each mundane detail felt like proof of something regained. Safety isn't traumatic when it's real. It's invisible. It's the absence of vigilance. One evening, as the light faded, I walked out to the gate and turned it slowly on its hinges, testing the smoothness of the motion. Raoul had done excellent work, as always. On the back, hidden from view, the inscription caught my eye again. I traced the letters with my fingers, not because I needed reassurance, but because rituals matter. They anchor memory without letting it dominate. The desert wind moved through the iron, producing a low, almost musical hum. I closed the gate gently and latched it, the sound clean and final. Emma left for college a week later. I watched her car disappear down the road, taillights blinking once before vanishing around the bend. The house felt larger again, but not empty, different. I walked through each room that night, checking locks out of habit, then smiled at myself and stopped. Old reflexes don't vanish overnight, they soften.
Months passed, seasons shifted subtly as they do in Arizona. The saguaros stood tall, scars faded but visible if you knew where to look. So was everything else. Healing doesn't mean forgetting damage ever existed. It means carrying it without letting it dictate your steps. Occasionally, I heard updates about Calder through indirect channels. Community service completed, probation check-ins. No dramatic downfall, just a long, quiet reckoning of consequences. I didn't feel satisfaction or anger about it, just distance. Some chapters close without needing commentary. One afternoon, a man knocked on my door carrying a clipboard. For half a second, muscle memory tightened in my chest. Then I recognized the logo, County Assessor's Office, routine inspection. He was polite, professional, efficient. When he finished, he paused at the gate, admiring the craftsmanship. "That's solid work," he said. "They don't make many like that anymore." I thanked him, and he left without incident. The moment passed, and the world didn't end. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. On warm night toward the end of summer, I sat on the porch again, coffee cooling in my hand, stars emerging one by one. The neighborhood was quiet, not silent, but settled. Somewhere down the street, someone laughed. A dog barked once, then stopped. Ordinary sounds, reclaimed. I thought about how close we'd come to losing this, not because of a catastrophe or accident, but because of small power wielded without restraint. It struck me how often that's how things are lost. I finished my coffee and stood, stretching, joints reminding me the time moves whether you acknowledge it or not. Before going inside, I took one last look at the gate, solid and unmoved. It had become more than a boundary. It was a marker in time, separating who we were before from who we became after. Not harder, just clearer. Inside, I turned off the lights and headed for bed, locking the door out of habit, then pausing with my hand on the knob. I unlocked it again, smiling at the quiet confidence of the gesture. The house held the night easily now. Outside, the desert breathed, indifferent and enduring. And on this half-acre of ground, shaped by loss, conflict, and resolve, a home remained. Not because it was never threatened, but because it was defended patiently and lawfully until the threat exhausted itself. Somewhere far away, Emma was settling into her new room, learning who she'd be next. Somewhere else, systems were working the way they should, dull and dependable. And here, under a wide Arizona sky, the gate stood closed, not in defiance, but in peace.